As you heard, my name is Peter, and this is the part of the presentation where I would normally introduce myself. And I'd like to introduce myself by giving you a snapshot of my life about 2.5 years ago. And at that time, I was working really hard. I was working 7 days a week, and I felt, man, I need to organize my time better. I need to get better at getting things done. And I read an article on LinkedIn. The short version of it was, don't manage the hours, manage the minutes. And so here I am organizing my life in Pomodoros, in increments of 25 minutes. And I'd like to point out that first column on the left is Sunday. Okay? So the problem wasn't that I wasn't good at managing my time. My problem is I didn't have enough time. Well, wait a minute, because the amount of time we have is always the same. So the real problem is I have too much to do. And for some reason, I'm not making progress. I'm working like crazy, but I feel like I'm burning out. I'm not getting where I want to go. And so I realized I needed to change something, and this started me down a path of learning. And I'd like to share that path with you, if my computer is still talking to me. That path led me to create kind of my own little framework for how I organize my own life. And I discovered some very interesting aspects of it. I started getting resonance. One of the first resonances was from a fellow certified Scrum trainer, Maria Maturelli. By the way, I believe every certified Scrum teacher teaches hope. And so what we try to do is we try to share our knowledge. We try to inspire people to change their world for the better. And I realized that Agile is, well, up until now, it's always been a team and a corporate thing, but there's also a personal aspect of it. And that's what I'd like to share with you today. So I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on yourself. What's a goal? What's something that you've been wanting to do for a long time? You know, maybe a trip you've always wanted to take, a race you've always wanted to enter, something you've wanted to buy, something you've wanted to achieve. Just take a moment to reflect on that. The next question is, how long have you had this goal? How long have you been thinking of this? Is this something you've thought about for 6 months, for a year, for 5 years, all your life? And, you know, if this is something important to you and you've been thinking about doing it for a long time, well, what's preventing you from achieving that? Now, my partner in crime, Maria Maturelli, she asked this question at the Scrum gathering in Minneapolis this summer. And we discovered some very interesting things. Okay? Most people, most of our goals, we've had them for longer than a year. Okay? Something like 70% a year or longer. So, you know, these big goals in our lives, they take a long time to get there. The interesting question is why? So let's talk a bit about what's preventing you from achieving those goals. Well, it turns out only about 1/4 of us are actually working towards achieving the goal. Only 1/4. The rest of us, like 75%, almost 3/4, you know, aren't really thinking about their goal, aren't trying to achieve it, are too busy with other things, putting other people before themselves. So, here's a question for you. What really matters? Does this goal really matter to you? Okay, and if it does, what's preventing you from working on it? Why aren't you working on it? So, for a lot of people, that goal is some way tied to success. And success is kind of an interesting thing. This is my picture. I was looking for a picture of success. And I thought, man, there I am, looking out with confidence into the future. The sky is blue, the sun is warm, the environment is very comfortable. Okay? But, you know, there are a couple of things about that success. First of all, it's hard work to get there. You know, you're always working. And that sky, well, it's not really as blue as it looks, is it? There are clouds out there. And if you look closely, and if the screen resolution will share it with us, I'm pretty sure those are storm clouds on the horizon. So no matter how successful you are, you got to keep working. Okay? And the problem is all that work gets to be tiring. Okay? And you're working harder and harder, and that list of things to do is getting longer, and you start questioning, well, what is the purpose of all of this? And your life gets grayer and grayer, and this is burnout. Okay? Now, it's funny, I think success and burnout, they're on razor's edge, one side or the other. Either you're the hero or you're in a disastrous state. I'm very interested in following the career of Elon Musk because it seems like he's either going to be the hero or he's going to be the disaster, and it's not really clear which. But I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you didn't have to worry about any of that. Okay? Imagine you could accomplish your goals. You didn't have anything to fear. You knew in advance you were going to succeed. What would that be like? Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to pretend just for a moment that you've got nothing to worry about, that you can breathe deep, and you can achieve what you set out to achieve. Let's talk about how you could do it. Okay? So the first thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about the challenge of actually getting things done. What makes it difficult to get things done, especially getting the right things done. We're going to talk especially about focus and the importance of saying no. How many of you have problems saying no? Does anyone worry about, I say yes too often, it's hard for me to say no? Well, we're going to discover that in order to get important things done, we also need to be able to say no. And then I'd like to introduce these 6 questions to help you say yes to the right things. So let's start with the challenge of getting things done. Does any of this look familiar to you? That first statement that was my statement about a year and a half ago. And I'm a little better than that now. I generally don't work on Sundays. I've been able to reduce my pensum down to 6 days a week instead of 7. I'm actually fairly happy with that. Okay? And we see there are lots of things getting in our way. One of these versions, I call this stuck in the matrix. How many of you work in a matrix management organization? You've got more than one boss or more than one stakeholder. And they all have something for you to do, right? And everything's really important. Okay? Can any one of them tell you what you should do next? Okay? What should you be working on right now? I actually believe that the reason why we talk about multitasking being so bad for your performance, it's not that doing the work is that bad, but the more things you have to choose from, the harder it is to decide what you want to do next. This was my problem. See that stack of papers? Well, I'm actually pretty good at working through that stack of papers, but the problem is, the faster I work down that stack of papers, the faster it grows. Okay? And at the end of the day, at the end of the week, it's just as long as it was at the beginning. A colleague of mine, executive director of a creative consulting firm, he said, I'd like to start the week with confidence, okay, and end the week with satisfaction. And that means having an endless stack of things to do just doesn't fit into that picture. And finally, no. No is such a risky word. What happens when you say no? Okay? If you say no, at the very least, it's a conflict word. You're going to enter a discussion. Okay? Yes, but is almost as good as saying no in that context. But if you say no to a customer, what's going to happen to the customer? You might lose the customer. If you say no to your manager, what's going to happen to your manager? Okay? Now, on the other hand, if you take on too many things, well, I'd like you to imagine those bowling pins or eggs. What's going to happen when they start to hit the ground? All of a sudden, you got egg on your face. So that's kind of an embarrassing position to be in. So you're kind of stuck if you do, stuck if you don't. So what I'd like to do is talk now about focus and why that saying no is somehow inevitable. Because whether you want to or not, sooner or later, that word no is going to come out. The question is when. So here is the problem. Remember those 3 bosses? They're all giving us work to do. Is there any restriction, any limit on how much work they can give us? Okay? And the short answer is basically no. Okay? They can say, I want more, I want more, I want more. The problem is, though, we have limited capacity. Some of us like to go home at the end of the day. Some of us like to get sleep. We like to take time off to eat and drink, maybe go out with friends, see a movie. But even if we don't, we can expand it only so much. And eventually we hit exhaustion and we can't work anymore. Okay? So that capacity is limited. And you'll notice that capacity is smaller than the demand. So there are some things that we can do and there are some things that we can't do. Now, some of the stuff that we do matters. It makes a difference to us. And some of it doesn't. The technical term for that is waste. Okay? And so the question is, how are you going to spend your time? Having impact, being successful, being satisfied, that's mostly about investing your energy in stuff that matters to you. Okay? And here's the cool thing. It's your life. You get to decide what matters. Now, the alternative is you spend your time doing stuff that you don't care about. Where does that leave you? You say, why am I doing this? Okay, so this is the burnout, when you start finding yourself doing things that you don't care about. Or you get to the end of the year and you're having a conversation with your boss about the about your pay raise and what you're going to do next year, and you spent all sorts of time doing stuff that has no value. So this is what we want to avoid. So what I want to give you are 3 basic skills in order to get the right stuff done. Okay? So the first skill is actually doing the work. Okay? You got to be good at doing stuff done, at getting stuff done. Now, the problem is that's not just the actual doing, but it's also keeping track of what you have to do. We have an interesting conversation, should you keep a backlog or not? And I'm going to say yes, but not too much of a backlog, because too much of a backlog can bog you down. But if you lose track of things, then they get lost. Okay? So keeping track of what you're doing is a key thing. The next thing is the ability to set priorities. Okay? We know we can't do everything, so we want to pick the things that mean the most to us, or if we don't care about them, ignore the things where the consequences are least bad. So we need to prioritize. But it also means you need something to prioritize against. You need to have some concept of what matters. And the last thing is to question yourself or challenge yourself. The Germans call this hinterfragen. We have the thing, and then we have the background, the thing behind the thing that's stuck. You got to be able to ask the questions, the in-depth questions. Am I working to priorities? Have I set the right priorities? Okay? And actually, I find this is the hardest thing to do. I'm working hard, I've set priorities, and I'm working, but every once in a while, I need to stop, take a deep breath, stand back, and reflect on what I'm doing. Have I set the right priorities? Am I working according to priority? Now, how many of you guys are doing Scrum or something close to it? Okay? So pretty much everybody, okay? And you're going to recognize these same 3 patterns. Okay? In Scrum, you have a team whose job it is to solve the problem. You have a product owner whose job it is to formulate the problem and set the priorities. And you got the Scrum Master whose job it is to be the voice of common sense. Quick question for you. For those of you doing Scrum, is your Scrum Master a voice of common sense? Yes, no, maybe? That's much, much smaller than the people who said they're doing Scrum. Okay, so if your Scrum Master isn't the voice of common sense, you need to have a conversation with someone, because part of the job of the Scrum Master is to remind the team and the product owner, the development team and the product owner that they're on the same team, and they need to be nice to each other. They need to collaborate with each other. Okay? Now, when we're doing this in our own lives, we don't have anyone to delegate to. Okay, so we kind of have to do this with ourselves. And I think of it as your body does the work, your head is the one doing the prioritizing, and your heart reminds you that you need to be nice to yourself. So what are we trying to do? Well, we want to say yes to what matters. We want to say no to what doesn't. And what's actually, if you've ever looked at dot voting, what you discover is we just want to ignore the stuff that doesn't matter. We want to focus on the stuff that somehow brings us forward, that's something that matters. So I'd like to share a metaphor with you. I'd like you to imagine, let's go back to, 1800 something, 1900 something. I mean, even 1980 would probably do. There was no GPS back then. You're the captain of a sailing ship. Okay? You've decided, you're somewhere on the western coast of Europe, you've decided you want to go to Jamaica. What's going to get that ship to Jamaica? Well, the first thing is that ship needs a captain who wants to go to Jamaica. If you don't want to go to Jamaica, if you don't care about the goal, then the ship can just float in the water and it will stay there for a while. But if you want to go to Jamaica, well, you need to set the course and you need some energy and some drive. Okay, so you say, let's go to Jamaica. Great, I want to write my book. My book is called Jamaica. So you set sail for Jamaica. Okay, so far so good. And you get out into the ocean, and then what happens? You hit a storm. Okay? You set out to write your book, and the telephone rings. You set out to do something, and your kids need something, or your spouse needs something. So what happens? You get blown off course. What does this mean? Does this mean the voyage is over? You still want to go to Jamaica? Well, if you still want to go to Jamaica, what you need to be able to do is take a fix where you are, understand your position, and say, oh, Jamaica is that way. In this case, I need to turn about 100 degrees to the right to start getting back on course to Jamaica. And so this is how you achieve big goals. Okay? You got to deal with the storms that make up your life every day. You've got to deal with the distractions, and you need to remember what the big goals are and make sure that you're on course to achieving them. So I'd like to give you the GPS. The 6 questions that are going to help you change your life, help you figure out what really matters. Okay, we call these the 6 questions of personal agility. And the first question is actually pretty obvious. What really matters? Now the problem is it's not always easy to answer that question. Okay, it may even take you a while to figure out what really matters. And in fact, the life-changing things are when you realize that what you thought really mattered isn't what really matters. But once you know what really matters, well, then you have a basis for making decisions about how to allocate your time. When I first told my colleague Maria about the questions of personal agility, I asked her what really mattered, and she told me about the 3 things that she wanted to do in her daily life, which had a lot to do with travel and being a DJ and a couple of other things. And then she realized, you know, my health sucks. I spent time in the hospital last year, and I couldn't work because hotel food over a long period of time is bad for you. And actually, what really matters to me is my health. And because she realized what really mattered in her life, she completely changed her lifestyle. Okay? And now she focuses on her health, she's lost weight, she's cut down dramatically on her traveling, and she's much happier. So what really matters is the key to figuring out where you're going. The second question, what did you do last week? Now, why do I ask, what did you do last week? Well, that's your breadcrumb trail. That's looking at where you're coming from. Because even if you don't know what matters, you make decisions about how to spend your time. Okay? And those decisions reflect something that matters. Are they taking you where you want to go? Are they taking you to your Jamaica? Well, I don't know. But by looking at where you are, you can ask yourself that question. Okay? By the way, we call this celebration because even if you did something different than what you set out to do, you set a course for Jamaica and all of a sudden you're going to Antarctica, hey, the boat hasn't sunk, you've gotten some things done, you had good reasons for doing what you were doing, give yourself a pat on the back. We call this celebration. Okay, so now you know where you are. The next thing to do is look at where you could go. Okay, and so these next 2 questions are about triage, about deciding what it is that you want to do this week. It's about setting your course for the next week. The first question is, what could I do? Now, in real life, what you're going to do is you're going to write down this list. Every time you think of something you want to do, you write it down, and then put it someplace where you're going to find it again. That could be your refrigerator. In my case, I use Trello. I put it in a Trello board. I'll show you an example in a moment. And then once a week, I look at what's in the Trello board. I look at what I got done. And then I start to say, okay, of all the things that I could do, which of those are important? Which of those are going to get me to Jamaica? Okay? Now, there are some things that might seem less important, but they're urgent, and I might do them anyway. I have been told that if you don't pay your telephone bill, sooner or later the telephone company will turn it off. Okay? And that's generally considered a bad thing. So, if I haven't paid my bill and they're going to turn it off this week, well, maybe now would be a good time to pay the bill. That's urgent. Something bad will happen if you don't do it. Important is like writing your book. There's no penalty for not writing your book, but if you don't do it, you'll never get the benefit that you hope for. Okay? So now we have, basically a sorted list of the things that you could do. The most important ones are at the top. You've highlighted some urgent ones that you need to pay attention to. The next question is, well, what do you want to get done this week? This is setting your intention. This is setting your course. Now, it's entirely possible that during the week, you're going to get distracted. The phone's going to ring and you have to go off and do something else. But when that distraction is over, what are you going to come back to? What's the course that you're trying to hold? Okay? So this is, if you will, the short list of the things that you could do. Okay? We call this choosing. And the basic ritual, we call this celebrate and choose. So the idea is at least once a week, you're going to basically go through this reflection process. Take a look at what really matters. Have I got it right? Celebrate what you got done. Choose what you'd like to get done the next week. And then you go off and do it. Okay? Now, is that literally every week? Well, no. It's your life. If you need to do it more than once a week, that's okay. If you don't get to it once a week, that's okay too. The board will still be there for you. But on the other hand, if you don't use it, it won't help you. So, but be nice to yourself. You're doing the best you can. So the basic idea is every week, right now you are somebody, you got some stuff done. Next week, you want to get some more stuff done, and that week should take you a step closer to who you want to be or what you want to accomplish? Now, some of you have probably noticed that that's only 5 questions. What's the 6th question? Well, for me, the 6th question is about getting unstuck. And I have found the question, who can help, to be extremely useful. Because just by asking that question, I start to think about the problem from their perspective. I may actually reach out to them and say, can you help me on this? Or I may just try to think about it from their perspective. And once or twice I've realized, I've really got a knot in my stomach about dealing with this person. And there's actually some fear there that's preventing me from moving forward. Oh, and by the way, procrastination is always trying to tell you something. Usually one of 2 things. Either you're tired or you're afraid of something. And if you can identify what it is, that could really help you move forward. So we then use a thing we call the priorities map to visualize it. So that first column, the column on the left, we call that what really matters. Okay? And you're going to have 3, maybe 4 items. For your personal life, probably no more than 4. The reason here is very simple. If too many things matter, then nothing matters. Okay? And if you've got too many things in that column, then you're going to discover that the lower priority items don't get much attention and you don't really do them. The next 2 columns are about identifying, those triage questions. What could you do? What's important? What's urgent? The rightmost column here is the doing column. This is what I want to get done this week. Okay, and there are a couple of columns that we didn't show, like going from waiting to working to done. That column would be, if you're doing personal Kanban, the doing column is the start of personal Kanban, saying, okay, let's actually get the stuff done that I want to get done. So the basic rhythm is simple. Once a week, ask yourself the 6 questions, visualize the answers, and then use those answers to guide your choices for what you're going to do over the course of the week. Now, I started looking at this I started putting it together, I guess, well, I first asked the question, I think it was in February. By the summer of that year, I had something together that was kind of more or less working and pretty much what I do now. I shared it with a colleague. Hartmut, he was the first person who kind of said, oh, this is cool, I'll try it out. I'm not even sure if he told me he was going to try it out or not. But 6 months later, he sent me an email, 3 words, this really works. The last person to send, or the most recent person to send me an email like that was the executive director of a creative consulting company in Zurich. This is really useful. But on the other hand, why should you believe me? So what we're doing right now, we actually started this in 2017. We're doing another round of interviews now. We call this the Recognized Practitioner Program. So, if you're actually doing personal agility, what we do is we reach out and interview you and find out how you're doing personal agility and build some case studies. And I believe Maciek, I'm not sure, Maciek, are you here today? He's probably not in the room because he's seen this before, but he was a speaker yesterday. So there are various people who have been doing this who you can actually talk to, and we've been recording their cases. And it's funny, I looked at this one, and I said, how many of these actually apply to me? And for me personally, it's about 6 or 7 of them, starting with the beating procrastination, which was the number 1 benefit that's been recorded up till now. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to encourage you, hello, talk to me, to give this a try. We have a guide to personal agility that you can download. We're working on our book. You can join our early book club for free at mypersonalagility.org. I'd like to extend an invitation to join the club. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. I believe we have 5 minutes for questions. Am I right?
We have around 4, so that's a great time for questions.
Okay, so now we're down to 3:55. Yes, sir, here in the front.
The 6th question?
The 6th question is who can help? Okay, and that's the unblocking question. And if that doesn't help you get unblocked, try what am I afraid of? That's also very useful.
So what is the most important question for you, Peter?
What is the most important question? I think that what really matters question is the most important because that's the one that can change your life. Because what happens is people, they go off doing things that they think are important and then they stop, you ask them the question and they say, oh, wait a minute, what really matters? And then they write things down. And then they look at it and they say, well, actually, no, that's not what really matters. Or this is what really matters, but I'm not doing that. Okay, and it's the reflection that comes out of asking yourself the question that leads you to move in the direction that you want to go.
Thank you. Do we have one more question? Here I come.
Hi, my name is
Hi
Tadek. I would like to ask you, because the first step is like making this Trello board is could be quite easy, but do you have any patterns to keep looking at this board or keeping your your aim on this?
Okay, the way I
target.
do this, this is where you'll notice that personal agility is phrased as a series of questions. Okay, and if you're into coaching, you'll recognize them as open questions and potentially even powerful questions. Okay, and so personal agility at its heart is at a coaching framework. And the way I actually came to the who can help question is I realized it was difficult for me to stop and actually look at the board and ask myself the questions. And so what I did is I made an appointment with my wife once a week. You know, we met, I think now we do it on Monday mornings unless I'm at a conference. And basically every morning every Monday morning, we sit down, we look at the board. This is mostly about her helping me figure out what's really important in my life and what I want to get done this week. Although we also use it as an opportunity to look at our calendars, and say, oh, we both need the car on Thursday. How are we going to resolve that conflict? So it makes us conflict preventing rather than conflict avoiding, and that's had a very pleasant side effect. So you can use these questions, or you can ask your spouse to ask you these questions. You can ask your manager these questions. What's really important, what really matters. Let me show you what I'm doing. So you can use this as a simple coaching framework to build alignment and agreement with the people around you. Does that answer your question? So once a week, start with your spouse, start with a trusted colleague. That would be, or if you actually have a coach, you can have a coach do that for you as well.
Okay. I think, Peter, you're staying till tomorrow, so people can
Yes,
catch you
yes.
during the breaks. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much.